Have you ever encountered true evil? How? My kids went to visit their mom in the UK on a court-ordered visit. I knew what was going to happen, but couldn't prevent the visit. Sure enough, rather than put them on a plane back to me in the USA, she went on the run with them and her boyfriend. I got a lot of help from the Center for Missing and Exploited Children, the US State Department, and the Scottish government paid all my legal fees over there. During the 5 months she had the kids, she tried to brainwash them. She told them, if they came back to me, I would allow them to be molested and kill them. This was relentless. My son was incredibly strong and refused to believe her or cooperate. They were 13 at the time, but my daughter was much easier to manipulate. I really don't know for certain that they weren't physically abused, but a lot of the stuff she accused me of was things she and her then boyfriend, now husband, did to the children. I had to fly to Scotland to appear in a trial. I walked out of the courthouse at 9 PM on a Friday night with the children. Normal process for these cases is to have a designated handover 2 or 3 days later. But the child psychologist who interviewed us all was positive that my ex-wife would kill the children. And the judge agreed. I got them back in the clothes they stood in. I have no doubt she would indeed have killed them, rather than hand them over to me. 5 years later, she has no contact with the children. Their choice. They have anxiety and depression, but are doing remarkably well. They are high school seniors now, and they make me proud every day. I worked with a guy in Ontario who was always posting on Facebook that he just adopted new puppy like every 4 or 5 months. He adopted them from all different shelters and people. Had to have about 8 or 9 at one point. We went to his house for some reason and there were no dogs, no signs of dogs, no toys, no food bowls, etc. We asked about the puppies and he just offhandedly pointed to the backyard, which we noticed was full of little mounds, and said they all were sick and died. Guess he just didn't have good luck with animals. The way he said it was cold. The CSPCA investigated him and tested the remains. He was putting small amounts of his own homemade poison in the dog food and conducting his own little LD50 test. Back in 2011, my uncle down in Mexico had got kidnapped by one of the cartels. They gave my entire family on my dad's side a random, and we would get him back. My dad called in people who owed him money and managed to get the 10 grams. He sent it down to the family down south, and they paid the ransom for my uncle. All we got in return was my uncle's lifeless body. There was a kid in my 6th grade class who loved designing his own custom shanks and then stabbing people in the arm or back with them. He had a look of pure joy on his face when he saw that he drew blood and caused suffering to another human. He was only suspended for a week the first 2 times he did this, before they finally kicked him out of school after the 3rd time. My mother unexpectedly picked me up early from school one day and had brought my cat with her. Me, why is my cat in the car? To comfort you. Me, why do I need her to comfort me? Because your dad died. That's why I'm here to get you. I sobbed the whole drive home, holding my cat. When we pulled into the driveway she told me it was a joke and to stop being dramatic. My dad wasn't dead. She just made it up and brought my cat to add to the effect. She thought it was hilarious. Maybe not pure evil, but psychotic. She never stopped playing jokes on me. I'm in my 30s now. We're estranged. I've told this story before about meeting a murderer. Was a journalist on weekend duty. Got called out to a story. Guy claims his car was hijacked with his 2-year-old son in it. I met him at the police station. He seemed devastated. I was devastated. I mean, I'd done plenty of grisly crime stories, but a missing kid is next level awful. Next day I had my day off. The regular crime reporter called me. They'd arrested the dad and found the little boy's body at a rubbish dump. He did it out of revenge for his wife cheating. It still bothers me to this day how I could have felt so much sympathy for this man. I shook his hand. I cried with him. I'm usually very good at picking up when someone is off. Just goes to show you. True evil disguises itself very well. My birth mom was abusive. She beat my brother mercilessly and let her boyfriend molest him. She ignored all of us daughters. Went days without eating. I felt like my aunt was pretty evil. And she was a kindergarten teacher no less. She pulled my arm out of its socket one time when I was 4 and she was helping me cross the road. I visited her when I was 16 and every opportunity she got she would whisper in my ear, "You are worthless. You are nothing." And just keep walking. The visit ended with her trying to strangle me after I took issue with her trying to force feed my brother Ginger. And that was the last time my family spoke to her. I remember fantasizing about getting back at her in some way for a while, but then moved on with my life and grew up. Years later, she was being her typical self with my uncle, her brother, and berating him, calling him worthless, and he shot her in the head, killing her. It was a real tragedy for the family as he shot himself afterwards as well. But I certainly have not missed my aunt. About 10 years ago I was walking in the city when I saw a motorcade of police stop in front of the courthouse. Tall, classy guy in handcuffs comes out, escorted by police, gives me a wink and a smile. Confident. I thought it was just some other finance mogul who took it too far. Saw him in the news a week later. Guy stabbed and killed his 2 young children in a bathtub to get back at this cheating ex. In Iraq there was a family that we would go see every other week or so while on patrol. We would ask them how things are going and if there was anything they needed us to do. They were a respected family in the area and did a lot to build their community to defend against the violence committed by the insurgency. It was a big family. Lots of kids. 3 wives. They were good people just trying to better their community. Their house just happened to be one Arad that was kind of a border between Al-Qaeda controlled territory and coalition controlled territory. One day we were patrolling the road as we didn't several times per week, and we came across a hole that had been blown into the road, making it impassable by vehicle. We turned around and got back onto the road a few miles further down and encountered another hole just like the first. The holes were about 2 miles apart and effective created a corridor for Al-Qaeda fighters to cross the road more freely. We dismounted to get to the family's house. Everyone was on edge. Once we arrived at the house it was immediately noticeable that something was wrong. It was silent and there was a smell surrounding the house. Inside was the most terrible thing I have ever seen. The entire family was gathered into the central room of the house where they were all tortured, raped and murdered. There was maybe a half inch of blood that was congealing on the floor. If you looked at the scene you could tell the order that it all happened. The father was killed last. The daughters were unclothed and laying face down. The mother and baby were killed with 1 bullet at the same time. By the time we had arrived they had all been dead for 2 or 3 days already. I think about this every day and I've had to stop to cry 3 times just to write it out. Edit. I just want to thank this community for its support. The amount of positive feedback has been pretty incredible. I do not want to perpetuate the "broken veteran" stereotype. While this is one of several painful memories that I carry with me, I have so many more of seeing the compassion that humans are capable of as well. Yes, there was a time that I struggled, and I struggled a lot, just as others have, but I have sought help, and today I'm doing well. I don't know about true evil, but my stepfather-in-law is a truly horrible person. My husband was diagnosed as autistic quite young. Stepfather said it was BS and just beat the shit out of him. Just beatings would have been one thing, but he got downright petty. He would purposely figure out the foods he had sensory issues with and cook only those foods. That turned into their entire menu. He claimed that they were his favorite foods, but this favoritism only occurred after he realized my husband didn't like them. He also would go out of his way to make sure my husband didn't get things he wanted, even if it meant eating more cake, so my husband had less. When my husband's teacher suggested special education he refused and just beat him more to try to get him to have good grades. All bruises were easily explained because my husband liked skateboarding. He was determined that autism was just bullshit and that it was nothing a good whooping couldn't fix. The final blow, the truly shitty thing, was the birth of his son. When my husband was in his late teens his mother and stepfather had a baby. The baby was diagnosed as autistic. He is one of those awesome parents now and fully advocates for autism awareness. He still refuses to acknowledge his stepson's autism and just ignores it. In my job I have to interview convicted criminals for court purposes. They have committed all kinds of crimes: rape, murder, domestic violence, child abuse. Some don't talk about their conduct but some do. Most have no concept or show no understanding or acceptance of how evil they are, which is pretty scary. They justify, minimize, blame others. I have an easy time putting them out of my mind after all these years at my job. But I also have to talk to the victims of their heinous crimes, and that is the worst part of my job. Hard to erase their pain from my brain. Yeah, when I was 16 to 17, I would go to someone's house to hang out, and they live relatively close to our high school's park. Sometimes there would be this guy at the park. He was a nice guy, a little too nice to me personally, but nonetheless, a nice guy. He would come up to me, and we would talk, and he would ask if I wanted to hang out with him and his friends. I would tell him no. My mom is expecting me home because stranger danger. Turns out my stranger danger vibe was correct, because I found out he raped 2 underage girls. Yeah, dodged a bullet. My grandmother, Betty, she was an absolutely horrible person. She adopted my father from her best friend, who probably had him out of wedlock. She treated him horribly. She beat him with a broom handle for leaving a toy truck in the backyard. She lied to him about his real mother and always made him feel guilty for adopting him and sacrificing for him. He was always conflicted about his relationship with her because she treated him like garbage every single day. But she did raise him, and she had no problem reminding him of that. Her demeanor was always brooding. A constant scowl was on her face. She always would point out anything about you that she didn't like or agree with. She would try to humiliate you publicly and call you stupid and worthless. She would always make comparisons like, why aren't you more like person X? To try to pit you emotionally against the people you are close to. The only nice thing she ever said to me was, your mother is a lazy good for nothing, but she makes a good pan of lasagna. But otherwise she's as useful as tits on a boar. I believe that she is the reason my father was so fucked up. He had moments of very pure love and affection. In his deepest heart he cared about us, my brother and I, but he was terribly violent. He would beat my mother to near death. Then after she left, he beat me, not so much my brother, though his discipline was stern. He had a work ethic like nobody you have ever seen. He built a huge house from scratch by himself in a year, while being a foreman pepper fitter, and taking additional work on the side. One day, he sort of ran out of chores, and went to my mom's house, and shot her twice before killing himself. Be good to your children. The harm you inflict is cyclical. You make the world a worse place for everybody when you raise a child with fear and hate and guilt. I used to work with a woman years ago who was estranged from her husband. The day before her husband was going to take their daughter to Disney World, she smothered her daughter with a pillow and then tried, unsuccessfully, to kill herself. I told this story on Reddit yesterday, so I'll keep this shorter. I had a friend that would threaten to kill herself every night and tell me it was my fault if she did it, and everyone would know because I didn't love her as more than friends. It ruined me. And then she started dating my best friend and their relationship was volatile and abusive. Everything she said was lies. I believe she was truly a psychopath. The first boyfriend I ever had, we were both 16. He was a pathological liar and a sociopath. He slowly became possessive and controlling. Wanted to be together constantly. Would accuse me of wearing things that were too revealing. Isolated me from my friends. When I tried to break up with him, he threatened to rape me and kill my dog. He pushed me out of a slowly moving car while his grandmother was driving. I was dumb as a box of rocks and had no self-esteem. So I didn't know any better. I nearly changed schools. My parents put me in therapy among other things. He ruined the first 2 years of high school for me. Over 20 years later he sent me a message on Facebook asking me how I was. Like we were old fucking pals. I didn't respond. Maybe he changed as an adult, but I seriously doubt it. I found out he died a couple years ago. He was involved in a crime involving his young daughter, and I'm pretty sure he was facing prison time. I honestly think the world is better off without him in it.